Breaking news, this is a code red emergency alert. Code red emergency alert. Now, you would think that I was going to be talking today about the Rafah invasion that has now officially kicked off with Israeli tanks rolling over the border just a couple hours ago, which is going to thrust the Middle East into a perpetual state of conflict and crisis, the likes of which we've never seen before, but you'd be mistaken. What I need to talk about today is the Russian placement of tactical nuclear weapons in the south of their country near Rostov-on-Don, very proximate to the Ukrainian border. Vladimir Putin has commissioned this in response to direct threats by Western officials that they're going to continue to up the ante and commit to more troop deployments inside Ukraine in the future, in addition to some intelligence that was leaked by both Russia and Belarus that signals that the Ukrainians are getting ready to launch a very large salvo of UK-made Storm Shadow as well as American-made ATACMS and Ukrainian drones against strategic targets inside Russia in the next 24 hours. And that's not all. Russia has also threatened to target UK directly. This is not your typical threats uttered by the Russian late-night TV punditry, nor is it the maniacal Monday rantings of Medvedev. This is a direct threat by the Russian government that not only are they going to target decision-making centers inside Ukraine, but they're also going to directly target military bases in the UK if Ukraine proceeds and, perhaps more importantly, is successful in its attacks against what I presume is going to be something inside Crimea. But for all we know, they could actually try to attack the Russian mainland. Now, if they do that, utilizing Western weapon systems, they're going to go ahead with these tactical nuclear drills, as they're calling them, and we are going to be very aptly and appropriately up another rung of the escalation ladder. And that's going to be it, because the Russians have sub-kiloton and kiloton level nuclear weapon systems that can be deployed even in artillery shells that they could potentially use in a battle against NATO troops in an attempt to interdict the mission creep of NATO inside Ukraine. They've also doubled down on their threat to not only take out the F-16s, because of course they deem them to be primarily nuclear weapons platforms, but also the airports from which they've emerged. Now recall that in recent days, I've been saying that the Ukrainians are talking about deploying these F-16s from bunker systems. I'm sure if those things existed, the Russians would likely know. If that is all a ruse, and in fact these things don't exist, that means they can only come from one place, and that is from the surrounding countries. All of the aforementioned has happened incredibly fast, okay? Remember, over the weekend, I was talking about a strategic reprieve and an odd radio silence and an odd, seemingly unofficial détente of sorts that had occurred between, at least in the Middle East, definitely in Ukraine and Russia, with the exception, of course, of some ongoing tactical operations. There was little happening over the weekend. And typically, when you see not a lot happening in climates such as this, that means that big storms are brewing. And this was it. If nothing else, I want people to understand and take away from this channel that if and when the lights go out, you will be on your own. Let that be the motivating factor that guides you in your preparedness endeavors. My goal with this channel is to really drive that point home. And I'm the devil's advocate for this, probably much more than many other prepping channels. I'm always trying to sympathize, maybe not sympathize, but I'm always trying to be more optimistic about the government's capabilities to come to your attention and aid in times of crisis. But I can assure you unequivocally that they have no plan, and that when the lights go out, these transmissions will cease. communication between you and everybody else that you've grown technologically dependent on communicating with will cease. Okay, and it's just going to be you, me, and everybody else where they're at with what they have, and that's going to be the end of it. So this is what's going down today above and beyond the synopsis of events. Russia is about to commit to tactical nuclear drills. Now, they haven't done this yet. They've threatened to do this, which of course will be the final red line. If they're doing tactical nuclear drills, we must presume that tactical nuclear weapons are going to be involved. Now, why is this problematic? Because of course, these tactical nuclear weapon systems deployed in Rostov-on-Don are going to be within striking distance of ATACMS and Storm Shadows. Now, I'm not saying that the Ukrainians are going to target those, although there's plenty of evidence to suggest that whether it be against Russian nuclear power plants, elements of the Russian nuclear strategic triad, or the manufacturing facilities where nuclear weapons are actually created, that Ukrainians have already targeted those. So I would not put it past them to try to target these tactical nuclear weapon systems in order to begin a response big enough that would force Europe and the United States to make good on their promises of coming to the aid of Ukrainians. I believe it was the minority leader of the House today who said that should Russia gain the upper hand and it starts to look like they're actually going to overthrow the Kiev government, because of course they don't recognize Zelensky as the legitimate leader anymore. In their minds, his tenure as the president has now expired because, of course, he imposed martial law and postponed elections. So in their mind, he is now on the wanted list. But the Western governments are saying, and this is not only the United States, this is numerous other governments, including Emmanuel Macron, has said that should Russia gain the upper hand, they will send troops in to confront the Russians directly. So this is the final rung of the escalation ladder for the use of low-yield tactical nuclear weapons in the theater of the Ukrainian conflict. Long ago, I suspected that we may well see the normalization of low-yield tactical nuclear weapons in war. The question becomes, is how do you get from the use of tactical nuclear weapons on the battlefield to the point of them being strategic nuclear weapons? So we're seeing that the Russians and Vladimir Putin, this is not your run-of-the-mill strategic exercise with the ICBMs and the SARMATs. This is impromptu. This is the Russians saying we are going to do this drill in direct response to NATO's threats to deploy, and not just threats, but make good on their threats as they have been, to deploy troops. Apparently, some members of the French military, as we've been talking about for the last few months, are already there. When you're like me, when you're this ahead of the news cycle, I mean, this is all really boring to me, to be brutally honest, because we've been talking about this for 5 months, and now it's all culminating. And now there is new information coming out that suggests that not only are the steadfast defender troops who are currently partaking in the exercises that are supposed to conclude at the end of May, not only are they going to stay there, but there's actually going to be more troop deployments into that region. So everything is happening really, really fast on the Russian-Ukrainian front right now. The Russian armed forces will conduct exercises on the preparation and use of non-strategic nuclear weapons. Very important, non-strategic. Because, of course, before the use of strategic weapons, you're going to use tactical nuclear weapons. And these can be deployed in a variety of ways. And it's no surprise that all of this just coincides, okay? This is all happening around the exact same time as the F-16s are about to be delivered that the Russians have deemed nuclear delivery platforms. This is something that could shake up the global markets and the global state of affairs unlike anything that we've ever before seen. It's also not surprising that Xi Jinping is currently doing his tour of Europe. So why did all of this happen at the same time? Did Xi Jinping go to Europe knowing that Europe was planning something in an attempt to forestall whatever was planned from happening? he apparently is not too satisfied with the results of his meetings already with Ursula von der Leyen, who is chastising the Chinese leader for his country's level of industriousness that apparently the UK cannot compete with. Europe, I should say, is upset with the Chinese because the Chinese industrial capacity is simply too vast and sophisticated, and Europe cannot compete. And thus, they are upset with the Chinese, and they feel that the Chinese need to slow down their economy just a little bit so everybody can catch up. They've also allegedly got commitments, according to Emmanuel Macron, that China will not supply weapons to Russia. Well, the issue was never, and this is just a totally moot point, because the issue was never that the Chinese were going to provide Russians with weapons. The Russians don't need China for weapons. What the Russians might need from the Chinese, potentially some, and I say some, raw materials, some component pieces, some labor even perhaps, to help them in their war machine. But they don't need the actual weapons themselves. Do they need some financial support in other ways? It's possible. Do they need to trade with the Chinese? Absolutely. But the Chinese need the Russians' oil and gas, arguably far more than the Russians need them. So this is the situation as it is shaping up today. And this is very concerning to know that tactical nuclear weapons are now going to be that close to Ukraine, because of course Ukraine will be incentivized to target these tactical nukes. I think that they're going to go for the Kerch Bridge. I think that's what the intelligence leak about a pending attack in the next 24 hours is pertinent to, but we're going to find out very, very quickly. And I'm interested to know why it is that Netanyahu made the decision to go into Rafah today. Now, another thing that I've observed here with this Rafah invasion is that you'll notice that right before the invasion happened, there were very optimistic people who thought that a negotiation was successful and that a deal had been reached. I mean, we're talking about minutes before the invasion happened. Apparently, Hamas had said they agreed upon a deal, and this was circulating throughout social media that Hamas had agreed to a deal, and that the leader, and then it later turned out that, well, this was a deal that Israel rejected a while ago, so they did agree to a deal, but it wasn't one that Israel accepted. And we see this often in that right before bad things are going to happen, we get this seeming détente of hostilities. I call it the strategic reprieve, right? This kind of period of radio silence that always precedes the big arrow attacks and offensive, because that's when you're getting everything ready. That's when things are going to be eerily silent, almost as if, negotiations might be peaceful. We've seen this before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, when Russia said they were turning the tanks around and don't worry because, we're going to strike a deal and nothing is going to happen. Now, it makes me think that this move, this deterrent move, and that's what this is, to deploy tactical nukes near the border in Ukraine, is just that. We may actually see the inversion of this, like we've seen after Iran launched those 300 missiles, and we had the anticlimactic response from the Israelis thereafter, which, the jury is still out on exactly what that is. Was it tactical nukes and F-35s, if you listen to Pepe Escobar, or was it just that they took out the radar systems? Who knows? I'm sure it was somewhere in between. But we often see this happen where what we think are going to be the big launching points for the flashbulb of events never are. And it's always when they start talking about peace, that's the launching point. So, I've always kind of known this, that, when they usually, those things are just a ruse, and it's a way for both sides to save face and say, well, we tried to negotiate, but the other guy invaded us anyways. I would be very, very concerned if we started hearing about peace deals in Ukraine for this very region. But the Russian Foreign Ministry has summoned the ambassador Nigel Casey over UK Foreign Secretary David Cameron's remarks about Ukraine's right to utilize Storm Shadow missiles against Russian targets. And they've now threatened the UK directly. This is unprecedented. Even according to Dmitry Peskov, this is an unprecedented escalation. And this just seemingly came out of left field, although we've known that it's been brewing for a long time. I mean, we've been talking about this forever, it seems. And for me, it's just a nothing burger because we already, factored this in. This is part of the reason why I've been telling you guys I've been accelerating my preparedness and going off grid at a rapid speed because I see what's coming. Steadfast Defender has been pegged as a preparation for war with NATO. You have Poland, USA, and France all saying that they will send troops into Ukraine if it collapses. Now, all of this stuff is about to culminate in mid-May. Around May 21st is officially when Zelensky will no longer be recognized as the formal leader of Ukraine, and all bets are off after Xi Jinping returns from his European tour to China. I think that the Russians will show him that much respect to not initiate anything major until that period of time. But understand that the Russians are putting some enticing bait for the Ukrainians to put these or to conduct these nuclear drills. I'm presuming that that's going to entail nuclear weapons. It's neither here nor there because Belarus already has nuclear weapons very close to Poland. And, that cannot be understated how close these nuclear weapons are to Poland right now, who is openly, explicitly calling for the placement of nuclear weapons on their territory. Now they're saying that those troops that are positioned near the Suwalki corridor, they're going to stay there. They're going to no longer, and they're going to renounce the mining treaty, the Ottawa Convention Treaty on landmines. They're going to now commit to mining the border with Kaliningrad. They're calling for a blockade, a naval blockade and embargo on Kaliningrad. We're talking about the Baltic states and Finland. This situation is escalating very, very quickly, and we need to just to have our finger on the pulse of this new stuff. And I'm going to get it to you as soon as I get it. According to La Repubblica, they published a report claiming that a whopping 100,000 NATO troops could flood into Ukraine, all of course from Steadfast Defender. This is what they're preparing for. If you guys know anybody who's partaking in those exercises, I do have a couple sources in Poland, but nobody who's actively partaking in the exercises. There are no military exercises, only World War III disguises. But if you know anybody who is at liberty to disclose exactly what is going on there, we know what's going on. We've been reporting on it for months. But if you have any other insights, let me know. CanadianPrepper@hotmail.com. Now, again, 100,000 troops could flood into Ukraine if the decision is made, with the only realistic way to stop them from going beyond the Dnieper River and directly crashing with Russian troops is to use tactical nukes to try to slow the progress. Okay, now, are they going to go over the Dnieper River? Is that even possible at this point when the Russians have the initiative? I highly doubt it, but something is going on behind the scenes. There's a lot that we don't know, okay? The world is not run by the politicians and the show that they put on the legacy media networks. It's run by gangs of racketeers. That's all it is. Gangs of sophisticated racketeers who leverage law to lord over all of the peasantry. And this warning of strikes on UK territory is insane to me. Russia has officially threatened Britain with strikes on its territory in the event of Ukrainian strikes on Russian territory by British missiles. Now, if you've been hearing all the rhetoric and the talk for the last couple of years, you might be like, well, of course, haven't they said that before? They've never said that before. It's never come from the top down like it has come in the last few days, okay? The response to Kiev's attacks on the Russian Federation using British weapons could be attacks on military targets in Britain and outside Ukraine, the foreign ministry said. Massive escalation. Russia will perceive the appearance of F-16 jets as nuclear. Now, that could be interpreted in a lot of ways. Of course, the Russians are going to have the discernment. They've had the patience up until this point. They're not just going to launch strategic nukes because they see an F-16 come on the radar. I don't think that's what they mean. But what they do mean is that they're going to, or they can potentially use that as an excuse and potentially use it as an excuse to target NATO bases or somewhere outside the scope of hostilities in Ukraine. And that would be a big escalation. We are seeing this very gradual but certain move up the escalation ladder. If we were just seeing, wild moves being made, but every step up the ladder, we are seeing a firm ground, a firm plateau that has been reached in the escalation of hostilities. And we are going to see now the enclosure of Ukraine by not only from nuclear weapons from Belarus, but now the southern part of Rostov-on-Don. And people will say, well, yeah, but they have strategic nukes. They're not going to use city killers in Ukraine. Okay, it's the tactical nukes. It's the tactical artillery shells in the sub-kiloton range, in the 0.1 kiloton range, that are probably even very hard to detect whether or not they're nuclear weapons. Of course, they would have the visual nuclear signatures, I presume. But we really don't know what they have. We don't know if they've been testing these low yield, because I don't even know if they would show up on the radar if they were testing them. And we still have this space fiasco that the Americans believe that they have evidence to suggest that the Russians are already deploying nuclear weapons in space. So build those greenhouses, okay? Build those fortifications. Get those animals. Stockpile that shit while the getting is good. NATO may leave troops in the Suwalki corridor, the Belarusian Foreign Ministry has stated. Minsk does not rule out that the NATO contingent stationed for exercises in Suwalki may remain there on a permanent basis. I've been saying this all along. He recalled the recent statement of the American generals that the unit was temporarily stationed in Lithuania, will remain there indefinitely, and this is direct confirmation. In fact, part of the military units that are sent there for exercises remain there for permanent deployment. And of course, this is going to be the tip of the spear. These are the guys that are there to build out the infrastructure so that when the real troop numbers do file in, everything is prepared and the ground is ready for Poland not only to accept more troops, but also nuclear weapons. Peskov made an unprecedented comment. This is an unprecedented round of tension, according to Dmitry Peskov. So these statements by David Cameron should not be understated. And we need to remember that it was only a few months ago, maybe a year now, because time is just flying, that the United States and Britain said that Ukraine cannot utilize Western weapons to target deep inside Russian territory. Has Ukraine stopped the drone attacks on Russian oil refineries? No. Have they stopped their attacks on the strategic targets inside Russia? No. And now they're openly calling for it. So somebody is getting very, very desperate, and we are getting down to crunch time. Even the congressman, the leader, Hakeem Jeffries, the Democratic minority leader, is saying that the United States may intervene by sending troops into Ukraine. That's just foreshadowing. The troops are going to be there in some capacity. They're already there, right? We already know plainclothes mercs, but we're going to see U.S. troops. That's going to be normalized at some point. There is going to be some sort of arrangement that is made that prevents it from going full-blown Cold War strategic, where you're going to have Russian troops looking across from American troops. Mark my words, we're not that far away from that. Of course, Moscow has summoned Western ambassadors, and you only do that if there's serious stuff going on. What else do we got going on? This thing about the potential attacks happening on the morning of May 7th are very concerning, because that's in a matter of hours. So I guess we're going to see if that one bears out. Now, this could be disinformation. It could be May 9th. It could be the 10th, 13th. We just never know. Or it might be called off in response to these threats that Russia is saying with respect to the deployment of tactical nuclear weapons. You see, the West is trying to figure out how much Russia will tolerate. And it's only when Russia makes these red lines that the West knows that we've gone a little bit too far and we need to rein things in. The Russians are willing to play this conventional war game to a point, it seems, but they are committed to being victorious in Ukraine, not only in the annexation of the territories, but going well beyond that, as the Russian government has already officially stated, with some claiming that they're going all the way to Kiev. Certainly Odessa and Kharkov are going to fall, if you believe what the Russians say and if you believe they have the capabilities. The Iranians are helping Yemen build underground bases in the Yemeni mountains. So good luck with a ground campaign in Yemen. There's a reason why they haven't committed to that, by the way, because it's a mountainous country. And it's the same thing that happened with Afghanistan. It would just be a quagmire. The U.S. has allegedly suspended weapon shipments to Israel. Is this just the classic good cop, bad cop? Because the Democrats know that all of these protests going on has really made this a politically charged issue. And the humanitarian crisis that it's about to ensue after the Rafah invasion, as it's ongoing now, is going to be absolutely catastrophic. And we are going to see famine that we haven't seen in many, many years. And of course, this is going to be a very, very sensitive issue for a lot of people in the United States. It is only going to fan the flames of civil discourse and unrest even more. Egypt is preparing at the Rafah border because Hamas has threatened an asymmetrical response, which involves blowing up different parts of the gates in Egypt and allowing the fleeing Gazans to flood into the Sinai Desert. What they're going to do once they get in there, I don't know. Are the Egyptians going to be faced with potentially just gunning everybody down? I mean, and if that's the case, that's not going to look good on the global scene. People in Egypt are going to rise up and protest against that. But where do you go in the Sinai Desert? Is this all just a ploy to get the Gazans out and to get them into the surrounding countries and disperse them? I think the UK also talked about that, somebody within the UK government, if I'm not mistaken. I got another message from a source in Poland that I think I'm going to save from another day, but it's pertaining to some weird nuclear messaging that is going on in that country right now that is surreptitiously trying to prepare the population for a nuclear event without calling too much attention to the fact that they are warning people about this. But all I can say, my friends, is keep on prepping. Keep on stacking, keep on learning them skills, because there's a reason why I've been accelerating. And I'm just going on my gut at this point in time, that I knew that around now, these things were really going to start to coalesce into a shitstorm. And here we go. I'll keep you posted. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like, comment, subscribe.